Hello, and welcome to No Easy Answer. Today, we're discussing more ideas behind the removal of President Maduro by President Trump and what might be the motivations for that action that was taken in Venezuela now over a week ago, if you can believe it. Today, it's January 15th, and we're going to keep on cranking through these ideas and theories because I believe it's very important to discuss this to understand what might be the motivations. I want to remove any ideas that we can demonstratively prove are not true. And also, I want to offer my perspective as someone who lived in Venezuela for more than 6 years, from 2007 to 2013, and obviously have a huge care and heart for the people that are still there today and those who are abroad. So, as we look at these theories, first of all, in our previous video, we talked about resource-centered theories being the idea of oil and rare earth minerals. We looked into many of the issues behind those theories. I'd recommend you go back and look at that video. Today we're talking about monetary-centered theories, and then in the following videos we'll discuss the rest of these ideas about U.S. foreign policy, Trump-centered theories, and Venezuelan-centered theories, as these are important to discuss for the future of the world as it is being shaped in front of our eyes. Today, we're going to focus in on the idea of gold and silver being a large motivation to go in to run the country, as President Trump has said. And then in the next video, we're talking about the fortification of the U.S. dollar as it relates to U.S. foreign policy. But today I want to focus on this idea of gold and silver. And the reason being is that there's been a lot of things that have been popped up, especially late last week, as there were discussions about the amount of gold, the amount of silver that was in Venezuela. And I want to take a look at some of these. Now, some of the motivations, let's talk about silver. This was kind of really happening by the beginning of the new year. There's this idea that U.S. banks were over leveraged in silver, that they had sold more silver on paper than they actually had silver reserves of in the bank. And as the price of silver kept going up and up and up, if people wanted to sell that silver, they were going to be in a mess and they were not going to be able to actually honor those requests for that sale to convert it into physical silver. And so maybe the banks needed some way to find another source of silver and quick. As the price of silver keeps going up and up and up, China is preventing exports of silver because they're trying to accumulate more silver. It seems like there's just a move away from the U.S. dollar. And so the idea is that maybe the United States needs to get itself on some quick and easy silver reserves to help bolster its own money, its own dollar, both in reserves and in the future for money. So let's look at some of this. I grabbed this one post that I saw, and it says that Venezuela is setting on an estimated $1 trillion worth of silver and precious metals, making it the Latin American country with the richest supply of these resources. Let's see if this actually is true or not. Now, my numbers in looking at this are a little out of date, so my apologies when the price of silver has gone up since I did some of this math, but I can't keep up with it because this keeps going up too fast. In terms of actual silver reserves, here is a graphic from here. Let's change my face to small face. So I'm out of the way. Here's a graphic from Visual Capitalist. I recommend checking their stuff out. They do a great job with different types of graphics and making things very easy to see numbers and statistics. So I recommend giving them a follow. So they talk about silver reserves over the world. And when we talk about reserves, that means that the central bank of that country has that sitting in some sort of vault. They're sitting there. It's not just the idea that the bank has sold it or has a claim to it or that it's in the ground, but this is actual processed minerals that they have their hands on sitting in a bank and is safe. So ironically enough, when you look at all the flags on this graphic, Venezuela does not show up. It's not there at all. Peru actually has the world's largest silver reserves, 140,000 tons of silver, and that's the largest for the world and for Latin America. The United States, by comparison, only has 23,000. Russia has 92,000. China 70,000. So again, the other is 57,000. So I could not find any information for Venezuelan reserves. Maybe they have a lot of reserves, but I don't see any information whatsoever about the reserves of silver for Venezuela. So I can't verify how much they have or not. But let's just do some math to see what this actually turns into if you were to figure out how much 1 trillion silver would be. Now, when I did put these slides together, it was at $84 per ounce. I think it's gone up to 95 per ounce, but still, this is giving me a conservative idea of how much tons that would be when this post was placed. So if you were to run 1 trillion silver at $84 per ounce, that gets you about 340,000 tons of silver, which is higher than the largest reserve that Peru has by about double. To give you an idea, the global yearly production of silver hovers around 25,000 to 26,000 tons of silver. So that'd be about 13 years of global supply, which is a lot of silver if it's true. However, I can't see that it actually is true, at least in terms of their reserves. What about Venezuela's mining production? How much does it produce there? So when we look at that, this is a source from theglobaleconomy.com from 2016 to 2020. And again, we're talking about Venezuela. And sometimes, many times, the numbers that come out of the country may not be the most reliable. There are places that just don't have data. And many times when international entities try to get an idea of how much of something's coming out of the country or how much production is done within a country, it's very difficult to actually determine that, especially for Venezuela. Obviously, during Chavez's term as president, there was a lot of distrust of the international community. And so a lot of these numbers may not have a lot of basis. A lot of folks that are tasked to get these numbers, they may not be welcome into the country. So we have to look at this with some skepticism. But the data we do have, good or bad, maybe it gives us an idea. So we see a massive decrease, according to this graph, of how much silver is being smelted and refined in Venezuela. So we're seeing this go down from 1,700 tons in 2016 down to 480 in 2020. So a massive reduction in the actual amount. Again, this is not getting up to the numbers we would need to have $1 trillion worth. So it in my mind, this idea that there's $1 trillion of silver out there, maybe, but it would require a lot, possibly in the grounds, but it would require a lot of very focused and increased extraction. There's not a good idea of how much is in the ground, because there may not be good data about how much is out in the ground. And again, we're just always finding new reserves, and sometimes we're not. We'll know when there's not any more because we can't find any more. But again, it's kind of like the whole thing. You have to, in order to disprove something, you have to be able to expose everything and look at it. So I don't know, sure. But I mean, I could say there's $1 trillion silver under my house as well. I can't necessarily disprove that, but it's just not very likely. So in this case, I don't see that this particular claim has much basis whatsoever. So if silver is not necessarily a good case, what about gold? Now, why would the U.S. try to get gold out of Venezuela? Because it's gold. That's pretty much it. Gold has always been a motivation for moving people and encouraging people to do very harsh and evil things, as we'll see in just a little bit. But this might be an actual motivation to do that. So, unlike silver, there actually are a fair amount of gold reserves in Venezuela. This little graphic from Statista shows that Venezuela, in terms of Latin America, holds the largest reserves as of 2020. I'll come back to that in a second, but 161 tons of gold in reserves, compared all the way down to Colombia at the very end being 4.7, which is very ironic because Colombia was the birthplace of the concept of El Dorado. When the Spaniards first got into the inner part of the country where Bogota is currently located, they had to sail up the river Magdalena. They landed at a place called El Tora, and then they began to notice that the salt that the natives were using was of higher quality. They could tell it wasn't sea salt, it was mineral salt. And so from there, they began to march inward. They had a whole group of men. About 80% of them died on the trek inward, and then they reached this area where Bogota is currently located. And as they got there, they saw that the natives were just hanging gold trinkets and ornaments from the trees, as if it was a very expensive Christmas. But the natives there appreciated much more, or held much more value in salt and in clothing in terms of monetary value than they did in gold. Gold was used in ceremonies and other types of things, but it wasn't as valuable in their eyes as it was in the eyes of the Spanish. So obviously they see these people just hanging gold from trees and they think they've got it made. And so then this myth of this city made out of gold, which was actually most likely a ceremony, began to circulate amongst the Spaniards, and they began to look for this mythical city of El Dorado, which they were never able to find. Sorry, a little bit of a sidetrack. All right, so in Venezuela reserve. So this 161 tons, they have that in Venezuela, and part of that was when Chavez was recovering from cancer, his first round of cancer. He wanted to make sure that the country had more its reserves of gold in the country. Previously, most of it was held in a vault in London, and so they wanted to repatriate it and bring it back to Venezuela so that they could have direct control over it, and they could make sure that they could try to bolster up the local bolivar, the local currency, with that gold. He was able to bring over these tons and tons and tons of gold, and I'm trying to remember what the actual number, how much he brought in, but I know during the time of Maduro, starting in 2018, possibly even earlier, possibly later, Venezuela began to sell their reserves of gold to try to bolster and slow down the hyperinflation that they're experiencing with the local currency. So there's a lot of outcries. Now, there's 31 tons of gold that's still in England that's disputed. The Venezuelans claim it's theirs. The British claim it's theirs. I think it's been siding more towards the side of the British at this point than it is to Venezuela. So anyways, let's run with this 161 number. Let's kind of look and see what this turns into. So if you were to run 161 tons of gold, again, at $4,600, this little dated, I'm sure it's gone up since then, per ounce, that's only about $26 billion, which is not a lot. Remember, Trump sent $20 billion in aid to Argentina not too long ago. So this is not a huge number in terms of governmental sizes of gold. All right. And if we compare it to other countries, for example, the United States, Fort Knox, maybe they have other reserves, I don't know, 8,133 tons of gold. That's a lot compared to 161. That's there. Germany, 3,350. Japan, the very lowest on this list, 850 tons, 846 tons of gold. So it's not a huge stash in terms of comparison to other countries out in the world. It doesn't really seem like this would be a huge thing. Obviously, if you just want to go and take someone's gold, that's great. But again, $26 billion is not much in terms of percentages of what a government could get, and that's assuming you could just walk into the city, load up the golden trucks, and walk out and do who knows what with it. Again, it doesn't really make sense. All right, what about mining? Because it may be possible that there's a lot of gold in the ground, and that this part of the motivation to move in and to take Maduro is to go in and open up the area for mining, exploitation. So in 2018, a report, we'll look at in a second, estimated there's about 644 tons of gold. And that the Venezuelan government has estimated that number is much higher. And we'll see why they want that number to be higher. But 644 tons of gold estimate. All right, let's do another set of math. Let's see where we get to. So 644 tons of gold, same price, 4,600 per ounce. That gives us about $95 billion. That's better than 25, but still we're talking about 100 and 120. This is not much. 115, sorry, bad math. Early, guys. Forgive me for that. So all I have to say, the total amount of gold is not a huge amount. I mean, it's some, but this gold in particular, this is gold you have to go out and mine, and we're going to talk about all the difficulties with that. And in comparison to how much that is of the global production, again, global production is around 3,300, 3,600 metric tons. So we're talking maybe 2 months of global supply here. That's nothing. That's very, very, very little in terms of how much the country might actually offer in terms of its production. Now, how much has it actually been producing? Again, you have these numbers. I'm not sure I believe these numbers. We got 558 down to 480. That's very, very little to say that. And again, these numbers don't match up to me. Why are they always the exact same number for 6 years in a row, only have it drop down to 30 by 90%? I don't know. It's a little weird. Not sure I believe that. All that to say, this might give us a range of how much they are producing. And again, it's not much. Mine tons of gold, 480, something around there. And again, in terms of global supply, not much. Okay, so why would the Venezuelan government want you to come down, you, foreign investor, to come down and start mining in Venezuela? So here's a report that the Venezuelan government put together in English, mind you, in 2018. And it's a little old. I can't find an updated one. And it's called Responsible Mining in Venezuela, Investment Opportunities in the Mining Sector. Part of the push of this, again, was trying to bolster up the Venezuelan economy. They realized that they were so dependent on oil that when oil prices began to drop, everything that the economy of the country depended on was no longer reliable. And so then began a push to diversify. And one of these ideas was this mining in Venezuela, and to support that. Now, if you're a foreign investor, what is the government going to offer you in terms of becoming a gold investor? Well, here's one of their most enticing business offers, if you put it that way. They'll create a joint venture with you. So you, as a large foreign investor, will come in and create a joint venture with the state of Venezuela. The state of Venezuela is only going to own 55% of the venture. So you're never going to have a 50-50 fight because they own the majority, but it's only 55%. So that's pretty good, ain't it? And then you get to have 45% of it. Now, what do you get to bring in as part of that 45%? You get to bring in all the capital, all the investment, and everything that goes into actually the extraction of gold, the smelting of gold, and the selling of gold. You get to do all the work and put in all the investment, and you get to own 45% of the business. How about that? And obviously, no one has taken this up because no one's going to take this up. This is not a good investment for anyone to take on. And again, if the state owns 55% of your business, what trust do you have that they're not going to just come and rug you at some point? So this has not gone anywhere. However, all to say, that does not mean that there's not mining going on in the country. There actually is a lot of mining because there are resources out there. They may not be the most spectacular gold and silver resources in the world, but they're still out there. And people are working on it. The problem is, if you think, hey, you know what, maybe with the government now being run by the United States, I don't have to do this 55% mess anymore. I can just come in and start to mine the thing, and now it's going to be a chance to get as much gold as I can. And guess what that is? Here we are back to the search for El Dorado. There's no difference. This idea of a gold rush that we can come in and begin to extract the country and get $1 trillion of gold is a really dangerous idea to be promoting. And I want to be very clear about this. If you're watching this video, whoever you are, and you're thinking, I'm going to go down there, I'm going to mine $1 trillion of silver, I'm going to hire Elon Musk to clean my bathroom for $1 billion just because I can, look at me. Don't. Do not do it. You are putting yourself and many other people in danger, and it's not worth the risk. And I'm going to explain why that is in a second. It's not worth the risk to yourself. It's not worth the danger you're going to be putting yourself in and the harm you're going to be doing to the people that are already there. So please get the gold lust out of your eyes and begin to look at reason. This is not a good idea. Number one, quick update. This is taken from Fox News. I'm just trying to be even here and who I show news from. So here we go. U.S. warns Americans to leave Venezuela immediately as armed militias set up roadblocks. Again, these are the colectivos we talked about in the second video that are run by Diosdado Cabello. These are the groups of people that are under government control. They're kind of a policing agency that just run around on motorcycles and they do his bidding, whatever it happens to be. And apparently, even with Trump running the country, we don't know what the specifics are on that. They're looking for people that are American citizens and they are disappearing them, searching for them. I mean, look at these guys. It doesn't look like they're trying to give them a present. This is not great. Now, I don't think there's many Americans in the country. Typically, this is going to apply to people that have dual nationality, people that are Venezuelan but also have an American citizenship. And they're looking for those people. Now, why would they do that? What would be the motivation to get rid of Americans, to remove Americans from the country, especially right now that supposedly Trump is running it? And we have not seen Trump say anything, as far as I can tell, about this move in Venezuela. My thought is that if you are about to unleash an unholy terror on the populace of Venezuela and begin to do all sorts of unspeakable evil in the country, you don't want news getting out. You want to try to clamp down as tight as possible to not let any of the news of what's going on in the country out, which is why many journalists have disappeared. And you're trying to get people that are Americans out of the country so they don't come back later and say, hey, America, you are treating me improperly here. That would be a bad situation. I think that what they're looking for, what the government's looking for, is to be able to have a free reign of terror across everyone. Now, oddly enough, if you look how these guys are dressed, it looks eerily familiar, doesn't it? All right, a little bit of geography. So, two main states where these mineral reserves are found. Estado Amazonas, that's in the light green to the south, and then Estado Bolivar, which is in the dark green over to the east. I've been to Puerto Ayacucho, which is kind of the state capital of Amazonas, and it is hot as all get out. You can't even imagine how hot it is. Imagine getting a quote-unquote cold shower, no water heater, but you're sweating as you're getting the shower. That's how hot it is. It's horrible. Nobody owns a bed because it would just be absolutely destroyed by your own sweat as you sleep in it. So everyone sleeps in hammocks. I cannot sleep in hammocks. Maybe you can, but it is hot. And Puerto Ayacucho is kind of the gateway to the Amazon region. Now, the Amazon River does not go through here. The Orinoco River goes through here. But everything is south of Puerto Ayacucho is only accessible through boat. There's a whole network of rivers and channels that need to be traversed through these little tiny little boats, and that's how the indigenous communities are communicated with the rest of the world this way. The indigenous population here is about 300,000 people, and so it's not a huge population, but it's divided by various tribes. Some of these tribes are more remote. Some of them have preserved their own culture more than others. That's a whole study on itself, but it's pretty interesting and fascinating how that whole thing goes down. There's a lot of stories I could tell, but I'll just say it was for a different time. For Estado Bolivar, if you go far to the east and kind of far to the south corner of there, that's where you'll find Canaima. That's the area where Salto Angel, the highest waterfall of the world, is at. The movie Up, when they're running around in Venezuela, that's the part of the country that they're talking about, where you have these large rock structures that come up and make a little table at the top. Mesetas, or tupuis, as they're called, from the native language. And it's very different ecosystem at the very top, at the top of these things than it is at the bottom, and it's just pretty amazing. A lot of crazy ecosystem stuff. Amazing terrain, beautiful. I've not been out to that place. I know to get down to the area where Salto Angel and Canaima is at, it's about a 24-hour bus ride from Caracas, which is at this little yellow sliver up here, down to Canaima. It's about 12 hours from Caracas to Ciudad Bolivar, and then you come down to Canaima. One last thing to mention, in Estado Bolivar, there's a place called Estrechos de Angostura, which is where, if you're into mixing drinks, Angostura bitters come from. That's there. Okay, so to get around Venezuela, by the way, typically if you're driving, just know that there's going to be multiple cabalas, which are basically like National Guard setups, where you're going to have to stop, get out of your car, or if you're traveling by bus, get out of your bus. They're going to review your documents, make sure you are legal. and they're going to review all of your stuff to make sure you're not transporting drugs or anything like that. And if you're carrying too much of something they like, you might be lightened of your load. And you will see many of these. And the more you move in the direction towards Caracas, the more of these you're going to find. So even if you're traveling within Estado Bolivar, I was seeing someone trying to figure out how long this trip is now. They said from near the border of Brazil up to Ciudad Bolivar was about an 18-hour trip. They were stopped 4, 5, 6 times by the National Guard, checking everyone's documents to review everyone. So this is not like you just get in and hit the open road and drive. This is highly controlled in terms of how you get around. So as people are moving around, again, the question is what is happening as we look at mining. It would be silly to think that you, as a foreigner, if you wanted to persist and go and get your $1 trillion of silver, it'd be silly to think that you're the only one that thinks this way, because that's not the case. There is a lot of mining that goes on in Venezuela, and it's been going on for time immemorandum. It is not a new idea. This is nothing new. Ever since, even before the Spanish showed up, there was some mining, but not really in Venezuela. More you have to go to Peru and some of Mexico and the New World to kind of talk about serious mining, but even then it really wasn't necessary. There was enough resources that people could see just in rivers, and so there was not any kind of required massive ecological disturbance or disturbance of large quantities of the earth to actually extract a lot of the silver, because it's just there in the rivers. And again, the natives had a very large appreciation for nature, and so they used the silver in other ways that was not like the Europeans. As such, I want to discuss a little bit what this mining looked like when the Spaniards first got there, because again, I believe, as it says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. When the Spaniards showed up in the New World, they began to work with the natives to extract what they valued most, which was gold and silver. In that time, in the early 1500s, when they were in the island of Hispaniola, which is where the Dominican Republic is at, Haiti's at, where Cuba is at, where Jamaica is at, Puerto Rico, all these main islands that the Spaniards began to get to that are close to each other, they began to work with the natives, work in quotes, and force them to extract gold for them. In this process, a young missionary named Bartolome de las Casas came over from Spain, bright and cheery-eyed and ready to go evangelize all these natives into the Catholic faith. And when he got there, he was absolutely appalled by what he saw. He began to document what he was seeing, and he wrote a book, and he actually came back to Spain, published the book, and then began to talk about how the native peoples were being exterminated, and began to raise conscience about how they were being treated and how they're being removed from the earth by this desire for gold. His book is called A Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies. This is well within the public domain. You can find it in PDF. It's not, for a book, it's not very long, but you can read it, and it is the direct account of what he saw in many different areas, many different islands. And he talked about it. I want to read a small section of this about one area, and forgive me, I forget which part it is, but he talks about what the reality was for the indigenous people and their forced labor in the mines. It says this: and they discharged this duty, the mining duty, by sending the men down the mines where working conditions were appalling, to dig for gold, and putting the women to labor in the fields on their masters' estates, to till the soil and raise the crops, properly tasked only for the toughest and strongest of men. Both women and men were given only wild grasses to eat and other unnutritious foodstuffs. The mothers of young children promptly saw their milk dry up and their babies die. And with the women and the men separated, never seeing each other, no new children were born. The men died down the mines from overwork and starvation, and the same was true of the women who perished on the estates. The islanders, previously so numerous, began to die out, as would any nation subjugated to such appalling treatment. The Spaniards committed genocide against the native peoples that lived in these islands. They were wiped out entirely by forcing them to go and look for gold, work that they had never really done before. They were used to living in their societies, and with all the difficulties, challenges, and blessings that come with that, but this was different work for them. And they were given only grasses to eat, which is disgusting. And so Bartolomé de las Casas began to realize that this was, well, he saw it immediately. This was inhumane treatment, and began to let people know about what was going on to try to prevent this from continuing to happen in the rest of the Americas. And thankfully it did. The fact that there's even native blood in people in the rest of the New World was a testament to his work, that he was able to put a stop, for the most part, to a lot of these extinguishment of the native peoples there. However, I'll have to say things have gotten a little better, but they're still not great. So these folks, International Crisis Group, never really heard of them before, but it seems like they're continuing in Bartolomé de las Casas vein, trying to raise awareness of what the mining is going down in South America. So I want to read a little section from their report that was put out, I think, in 2020, maybe, called "A Curse of Gold Mining and Violence in Venezuela's South." And again, just kind of, you can see what the reality is of current mining going on in Venezuela. Now, again, this is being done typically by Venezuelans, or being run by people that are adjacent to Venezuela. Well, you'll see in a second. So, the consequences of the mining boom have been dire. The mercury that is widely used in the region to separate gold from gold ore contaminates waterways and fish, a dietary staple. Miners, most of whom are men, endure brutal treatment, as do the communities they come from. Criminal and rebel groups controlling the mines set arbitrary rules. Workers who defy them are severely punished. Accidents are common, as most miners lack any prior experience on training, and child labor is rampant. Criminal groups' reach extends beyond the mines. Part of those criminal groups are Colombian guerrilla groups, ELN in particular. Some are local to Venezuela. Sexual exploitation and human trafficking in the surrounding areas is widespread. Meanwhile, indigenous communities, which represent about half of the population of Amazonas state, are divided over how to deal with illegal mining. Armed groups invade their lands or bribe leaders to let them park mining equipment there. Many communities have abandoned agriculture, their traditional livelihood, in favor of mining. There is nothing new under the sun. What happened to the Spaniards is happening again. The indigenous people that are living in these areas are now, again, having to bear the brunt of all this. So Maduro was aware of a lot of this illegal mining that's been going on. And again, this has been going on forever. It's not like these mines are something new. This has been going on for a long time. It is understood that if you want to work in one of these mines, talking with people who have worked in some mines in different areas, you can go work in these places. You better be very careful, though, because you will be mistreated. If you try to go to the mines to find riches for yourself instead of just your wage, if you think you can find a gold nugget, or if you happen to find a jewel and you try to hide it and they find you, in best case scenario, you just get the living snot beat out of you. Worst case scenario, you're disappeared and tortured before so. And that's common. So many people disappear in the mines. A lot of the people that go to the mines are people that have had to flee because they've either killed someone and they're being looked for, and so they go to the mines as a place to go where they can work and try to have a better chance at finding fortune, although it's very unlikely. And then on top of that, when Maduro began to supposedly crack down on some of these things, all that happened was that the military and police that went out there to put an end to it, they began to take their own cut. They began to take everything they needed for it. And as they took their own part of it, they began to reinforce and protect the people that were running the mines. Now, again, I mentioned some of the Colombian guerrilla groups there, probably paramilitary groups. There's a lot of groups that are out there that are doing that. Maybe not paramilitary because they wouldn't jive ideologically with the Venezuelan government. But there are foreign groups that are there that are working or exploiting these mines and exploiting the people there. And it's harming the people. It's not good. These are evil actors that are working for the exploitation and their own enrichment that are causing issues for the people that live there. So, what's something you can do with all this to say? Oh, coming back to the theory, if Trump is trying to quote unquote run Venezuela, and they're trying to remove Americans from the country, again, I don't think he's trying to send in Americans to mine. I think if this is the case, and I kind of doubt it, this seems like this might be icing the cake, but I really don't think it is the case. If he was actually trying to extract gold and silver from the country, it's going to be much easier for him to work with the existing networks, people, resources, and know-how that's on the ground doing it. And if they have the backing of the U.S. government behind them and they're already doing evil, atrocious oppression and destruction of the environment for the people that are there, it's only going to get worse. One thing that I didn't even mention is that how the mercury is contaminating the waterways. Indigenous people, especially in Amazonas, they live off of fish. They have to eat fish. That is their main source of protein. And so if you take that away from them, they're going to, well, if you contaminate it, they're going to still eat fish, but then they're just going to start dying and no one's going to understand why they're dying. So if you begin to see reports in the future of, and again, there's diseases, but if it's understood it's mercury poisoning, that's where a lot of this is going to come from this mining. All right. So I don't know if I buy the whole gold and silver thing. And if it is, it's not good for the people of Venezuela. So what's something you can do? If you're going to buy gold and silver, my recommendation is if you can, buy it used. This is something that's already been mined, it's circulated, it's in use, and it doesn't need to be mined again. And you're causing a lower demand for mining. Now, obviously, you're buying of used silver is not, or used gold is not going to have a massive effect on the prices of silver, what's going on with the international economy. But you can have at least a cleaner conscience about it. If you are trying to buy new jewelry or something, you can look at the Responsible Jewelry Council. I will put the link down below to them. And they have a recommendation in PDF. It's the law to date, 2018. But you can still try to source your gold that way. Maybe it's an idea. I don't know. It's maybe better than nothing. I wouldn't really trust it. And then I'm going to say something really crazy. I'm going to say, go pan for gold. If there is gold in your area, I think rolling up your sleeves, doing a little bit of work, and not creating a huge amount of environmental destruction just because you're going to a stream and, making a little bit of disturbance there. I mean, not saying set up a sluice box, but I'm saying go see how hard it is to do the easy work. And this is the easy work, right? You're just panning for gold in the river. It doesn't get much easier than that. But I think there's something to doing an activity to appreciate the complications and how difficult something can be. Before you think, wow, this is going to be good. And then after, 9 trips, 10 trips, and you haven't found any, you might realize there's a little more to this than anything else. But I think it might be worth the experience just to give it a shot. So what is the actual outcomes for Venezuelans? Again, we're going to probably see an increase in internal conflicts between these mining groups, between the people that are running the mining groups, between governments and the police that run or give their blessing to these groups to do this work. I imagine it's going to be harder for them. We're going to see an increase in environmental damages, and it's very unlikely to see any local economic benefit at all. It's probably going to be much more damaging. All right, everyone. Where are we going from here? So next video, we're going to look at U.S. foreign policy-centered theories and how that corresponds to the idea of fortifying the U.S. dollar. And I believe we're going to find a lot more of the reality of what we're looking at that point. So continue to follow us. Give us a like, a subscribe. That'd be great. And thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you next time on No Easy Answer.